Hello and welcome guys to this session where I am going to speak on AWS Cognito Identity Pool to build a serverless web application. Let me introduce myself. I am Debarshi Mondal. I am a member of Technical Staff 1 at Antstack and a AWS Community Builder 2, and I successfully passed my AWS Certified Developer exam. Below is my LinkedIn QR code. You can follow me and you can connect me there. Let's get started. So let's move to our agenda for this session. So here are the agenda. So let's first start with introduction to Cognito Identity Pool. So I am into my AWS account, Amazon Cognito account, and here you can see Amazon Cognito provides two type of components. One is manage user pool and other one is manage identity pool. Basically with user pool, we can with the help of email and password, we can sign in and sign up to our application. But with manage identity pool, we can log in with any kind of social providers or federated identities. Let's say log in with Facebook or log in with Twitter, and we can access after successful login with federated identities, we can access our AWS resources. So let's move to and create a manage identity pool to use in our application. So here is the manage identity pool dashboard. You can see so there are a couple of identity pool I have created earlier. So let's click on the create new identity pool button. So let's give a name to our identity pool. Let's say Bookstore application. And under the unauthenticated identities, we will check this box, enable access to unauthenticated identities. This means that we are also giving some permission to our guest users who is not logged into our application. And moving below, we have authentication providers tab. Inside that, we have to configure our federated identities. So for this session, for the simplicity, we can use Google as our identity pool federated identities, and then it requires a Google client ID. So you can go get this Google client ID in the Google credential, Google Cloud credential. And here I have created I have into the Google Cloud account, and here you can see there is a client ID that I generated before. So I copy that and I paste here. So now we have successfully configured our Google Client ID as our social identity provider for our Cognito Identity Pool. Now hit create pool button. Once it will ask you for the roles which we have to give for authenticate and unauthenticated identities. So we will look into this roles configuration later in our session. Let's just hit allow button for now. So we have successfully created our identity pool. Here you can see we have a identity pool ID also, and yeah, we are good to go. Now that we have successfully created Amazon Cognito Identity Pool, now let's head back to our presentation and let's discuss about the architecture flow for our Cognito Identity Pool. So here you can see this is the architecture flow for our Cognito Identity Pool. Now I am going to discuss all the steps which the Cognito Identity Pool works. So as you can see here, we have a web application. A user will visit our application and he will sign in through any of the social providers. In our case, we have Twitter, Facebook, and user pool. User pool can itself be a social provider for identity pool. So in step number 1, user sign in with any of this provider, and then after successful sign in, it will head back to step number 2, that is Cognito Identity Pool. The request will now move to Cognito Identity Pool with the JWT token that you receive from after successful authenticate from the AWS from this identity providers. So this JW token will verify this Cognito Identity Pool will verify the JW token. It will check whether this JW token had a had expired or not, or it's had configured in the identity pool. So we have seen that how we configured a Google Client ID. So it will check those things. And after that, after successful verification from Cognito identity pool, so the request will now go to step number 3, that is the authentication role. So as we have said that we have two type of roles. One is authenticate, another one is unauthenticate. So as we are not a guest user for this flow, so the request will go to assume that that's an authenticate user. So it will assume to go and to the auth role. And then in the IAM role, we have a IAM role associated with that authenticate role, and we have some policy defined which we will access our AWS resources, which AWS resources we want to access. So the policy are written in that role. After that, in step number 4, with the help of those credential, that is the credential means the access key, secret key, and session token that is received from the IAM role, it is now goes to user in point, as you can see here, back to the user. And with that help of those user can save those tokens, save those keys in the form of browser, in the form of cookie in the browser. And you can you can see that in step number 5, with the help of this credential, we can access other AWS resources. All right. In the here case, we can see S3 or API gateway, right? So user want to call API gateway, so we have to give the permission in the IAM auth role to have invoke API gateway. So that's the how the identity pool work. So now we have seen that how Cognito identity pool works behind the scene. So let's now describe about a Bookstore application architecture flow. So I have created a application with React.js. So application name is Bookstore. Here you can see there are two components. One is unauth and other one is auth. So unauth is basically used for guest users, and authentication is basically used for signed in users. So here you can see in unauth part, we have two endpoints. So basically we have a use case that everyone, means the guest user, can view the book, can view all books, or can view a single book. But for authenticate users, for creating a book or liking a book, he or she must have to be signed in with any kind of social providers, right? So this Bookstore, this unauth component is, we are calling it from React.js, right? We are calling it from Frontend, and this authenticate part we are calling via API gateway, right? So API gateway, you can see here, this is the API gateway, and we have configured API gateway authorizer as AWS IAM as an authorizer for API gateway, and we are calling DynamoDB for the guest users. We are calling DynamoDB, that is our book table, right? We are calling from our React.js application, right? So how we are calling actually DynamoDB from front-end side. So we can look into the code later at the video. And now we are going to see how we can going to assign the roles for unauth and auth role. So for here, for unauth roles, we have to configure only for DynamoDB, because we are calling DynamoDB for guest users. And for authenticate roles, we have to assume permission for API gateway, right? So let's move to our identity pool console in AWS and configure the IAM roles. So we are back in our AWS console, and in the edit identity pool, you can see we have our identity pool name Bookstore app, and here we are now going to configure IAM roles, other for unauthenticate and other one is for authenticate. So you can see here for unauthenticate role, you can see the name of the unauthenticate role, that is Cognito underscore Bookstore underscore app underscore role. So what we can do, we can move to IAM console and we can search this role to add policies. So first, let's say this is our first configured for unauthentication role. So here you can see under the permission tab, there are some couple of permission policy is already defined. So we will customize this policy. And here for unauthenticate role, as we see in our bookstore example architecture, we have to give only DynamoDB as unauthenticate role. So we'll add an additional permission here, and we choose DynamoDB for our use case. And we will select here, let's say get operation, or let's say read get item. Yeah, so this is the get item, and one is for scan. Yeah, so we'll now add a specific resource ARN for that for our DynamoDB. So let's we have created a table already that is called book underscore table. We can move to additional tab. We can copy that ARN and we can paste here. Yeah, so all blocks are filled. So we can add this table as a resource, and then we can review our policy. So see, DynamoDB has been added as a read operation, and then save changes. So now if I expand this tab, you can see here is there are two actions. One is for get item, another one is for scan, and for unauthenticate role we are configured, right? So let's configure similarly for authenticate role. So I typed authentic role, and here same thing I have to apply. Just edit it, edit the previous policy. And we can add additional permission here in case we have to invoke only API gateway. So let's just type here execute API, and for filter we just have a write operation we can do, or we can have invoke if we have to give granular permission. And in the resources we can add a area ARN. So I have region, let's say we have in region AP South -1 account API ID. So I have created a API already. So let's copy this resource ID or API ID. So we have copied, and stage any let's say method we can say let's it for path or any. Yeah. So just add it, and yeah, we are good to go. We can review this policy, and here you can see execute API and save changes. So for both role we have configured the necessary permission required, and we will test those from our front-end application, right? That is our bookstore. So let's jump into our VS Code for that. So now I am into my VS Code, and here you can see there are in the sidebar you can see there are a couple of files and folder. So first I will move to front-end directory, and I will head back to my terminal, and I go inside my front-end directory, and here I am going to start my React application here with the command yarn start. So it's basically start my React application, and here it's my React application. It's basically nothing here you can see for now because it's still loading. If I move to inspect, and here you can see there is an error coming from Cognito identity pool, right? Yeah, so there is an identity pool error. So for the, it means that I have to configure something in our code, so that's why it is still loading. So what I'm going to show here, it's basically a list of all books, right? And for with our use case that guest user can see all the books and he can show a single book. So for that I have to configure Cognito. First of all, I move back to edit identity pool, and here I just simply copy this identity pool ID, and I will paste it in the React application inside. Let me just collapse this thing, and I move to source, and inside this home.js I have to configure Cognito identity pool. Here you can see in line number 16 I am calling DynamoDB. Where this DynamoDB is coming, it is coming from this use create out context. So I go to definition, and I came to this file auth context.js. Inside that you can see in line 14, I have to put that identity pool ID here. So basically I am importing AWS SDK and I am creating a credential for only for guest users. So that's why I am only calling identity pool ID a parameter here inside this function. And I am calling this service DynamoDB here. You can see I am configuring DynamoDB here with document client and I'm passing these credentials. So now I am exporting this DynamoDB. You can see here I'm exporting this and I fetch and I use this DynamoDB inside this home.js. Now if I move back to our React application, and yeah, it's already a reload. So here you can see there are two books and that is basically coming from database, right? So if I go this atomic habits, if I click this, as expected, user can view a single book, right? And it's a single book, and this atomic habits you can see in this DynamoDB table, it's listed here. If I go to explore table items, and here you can see there are two book ID. One is atomic habits, another one is the psychology of money. So yeah, so now I want my authenticated users to like this book or create a book, right? So this is a create from. So how I can do that? I have to first configure, first log out here. Yeah. Now I have to configure here Google login, right? So login with Google and login with Twitter. We can do both, but for our demo, we will only use login with Google, right? So with login with Google, there is a one more configuration we have to do on Cognito identity pool side. So let's move back to VS Code once again, and here you can see we have first of all we have configured identity pool one time, right, for guest users, but for authenticate users we have to again configure our identity pool, right? So for that I little bit I move to below, and here from this board this block of code allow access function, I have to configure our identity pool again. So I just simply copied this identity pool from here and I paste here, right? So what does it mean actually? So for guest user you only passing identity pool ID, right? Only one parameter inside this function, but for authenticate user we have to also give this parameter logins, and inside this whatever social providers we have to configure here. For our case we have Twitter and Google, right? So that in for Google, let's say we have to also pass this token. So as I explained in architecture flow, Google will log in, Google throw you an JW token. That JW token you have to pass in the Cognito identity pool, right? So here we are passing that, and with those Cognito will verify this client ID or with JW token, and if all are successful, it will grant me this access key, security key, and session token, right? And with this help of tokens, I am actually calling API gateway, right? So let's see the demo. If I hit enter and I will log in with Google, so a successful login, yeah. So now if I move back to psychology of money and if I press here like button, let's inspect it once again. So it says that failed to fetch exactly. API. Oh yeah. So we have to also remember that we have configured API gateway. So we have to also change this URL, right? API gateway. So I move to API gateway and in the stages. So in the dev stage, so let's copy this URL and just paste here. I paste, and now I will explain this bit of code, right? And now if I move back to my Chrome in my application, if I now click the like button and it works, right? So now we can like the book anytime, right? Any how much you want. So let's play with this atomic habits also, and initially we have 2 likes. If I press hit here, it becomes 3, it's become 4, 5, yeah. So kind of, so now we successfully like the book also. We can see the book, we can list all the book, we can search also, let's say atomic only, right? So this application is working as expected. So now I'm showing you how I'm configuring those access key, secret key and session token in the form of header and send those keys in the API gateway. So I move back to VS Code once again, and here you can see this send request function. This do all the thing. So I am importing a package called AWS for fetch, and I am calling a method called AWS client, and I'm binding all those tokens inside this function. Right, you can see here, and I have also give the service name, region, and this keys, and I'm passing this AWS here, right? And I'm also passing this URL. This is the URL. These are the endpoints that is dynamically capturing here. I'm passing from as a parameter from this function send request, and with the help of fetch method, I'm calling those thing, and I'm getting the response back, right? So this is how I'm going working actually. And here you can see this is the two times we have configured identity pool ID, one for guest users and other one is for authenticate users, right? And we can also similarly we can test our book, right? Add book, as we are in login, right? We can add book. So let's add Harry Potter, kind of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So let's give our title name. Author is we all know it's J.K. Rowling. We can get give any description, a good book. I loved it. Yeah. Image URL we can do from we can give from here, right? And I paste this URL, create this, and within a second you can see our book has been created, and here is the book, here is the description, author name, image. You can see we can also like the book, right? Right, as you can see. So our application is working absolutely fine, right? And this is how we actually worked with Cognito Identity Pool. With the power, Cognito Pool has some really cool feature. We can directly call our DynamoDB any function, let's say S3 bucket, API gateway, from directly from our front end code, as you can see here, with some configuration. And of course we can configure any kind of social provider. With the help of social provider, we don't have to always give any kind of password. You don't have to remember any password. That's a passwordless security feature you can imagine. Just log in with any kind of social provider, trusted social provider, you are good to go, and you can access all your service with those access key, secret key and session token. Yeah, so this access key, secret key and session token has some kind of expiration, right? You can check out the document of AWS. Here they have clearly mentioned there. And yeah, so we are good to go. And if you want this code base, I am attaching into my GitHub. I will paste the link here for my GitHub repo of this code base, right? Yeah. So let's conclude our session. So far we have learned that how we can configure and leverage Cognito Identity Pool, and also how we configure those identities in our front-end application, that is our Bookstore application, and how we configure auth and unauth role in identity pool console, and also in how with the feature of unauth role we are calling DynamoDB from our front-end application. We have also seen that how we can configure social identities, in our case Google, in identity pool console. Here is a code repo. You can see, you can clone the repo, and if you have any issues you can follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you.